Well, welcome, folks. It is another episode of Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 132 on this beautiful Tuesday morning, wherever you are in the world. And there's a great term from wherever you are with love. There was a movie that called that. We're coming from Mexico with love. Mexico to the world today with a very special guest. Somebody who's very, very dear to everybody in the world of intercultural practice that we do. And he is dialing in from Mexico. Stick around. We got a great chat coming up. ¿Cómo estás, mate?
Buenos días. Estoy bien. ¿Y tú?
Finer than frog's fur, as I said before. Yes, welcome. It is the show about the business of culture and the culture of business. And you know, we're just we've got a big week. We had a guest yesterday. We've got a guest today. We had a guest every day this week. I don't think actually has that happened.
It has happened before. There were rare weeks where we had a guest on every day. Wow. So we have to find out what the business of culture and the culture of business, what that is in Spanish. Is it el negocio de cultura y la cultura de negocios? No lo sé. Maybe we should ask somebody who actually speaks Spanish.
Absolutely. Let's bring him on. Victor Garza. Hola.
And we need to get him unmuted too.
We're gonna unmute.
Hello, Victor. Thank you for joining us. And as soon as your microphone is hot, we will actually hear you as well.
Okay, hola. Here it goes again. Good day, mate. Guten Morgen. Buenos dias, and good morning, everybody.
Hola.
Hola, hola.
So, was that correct? El negocio de cultura, or was that just a somewhat
in Spanish? It's perfectly correct, but the concept itself, a lot of intercultural concepts in Mexico and perhaps in the Spanish-speaking world are not very well known. So even though you spoke it correctly, people might not know what this is about.
So how would you phrase this in Spanish so Spanish speakers understand the concept?
Well, that's actually a great question. Right now, a lot of universities are starting to talk about intercultural communication and doing business in blah, blah, blah country. But this is one of the things that I'm actually starting to do to create a cultural awareness in Mexico within young people, within professionals, to start making uniform the language that we use in this part of the industry of intercultural communication. You know, we have words like cross-cultural, intercultural, transcultural, and multicultural. And even in English, these words sometimes get confusing. So in Spanish, we're in that process to create, you know, a uniform language in the cross-cultural world. I think if you say negocios con Alemania, negocios con Australia, negocios con Estados Unidos, that would be more meaningful for business.
Okay. So that would be actual transactions.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Doing business with, you know.
Yeah. So, and I just want to give a little bit of a backstory here as to how I met Victor, because his passion that I know that comes out of him and his commitment to this work and understanding in his own country comes out of you know, your experience, and of course I guess anybody that we meet that does the work, that's why I do the work, is because we've actually had experience outside of our country, right? We've had this, and the first time that I met Victor was at a conference, at a CETA USA conference, and I had been, you know, when I go to conferences, I like to kind of have my own room. Where, you know, some people love splitting rooms with people, right? It's a good way. I kind of use my room as a little bit of a sanctuary. And here I get this message that, you know, there's this guy coming from Mexico. I don't know him. Would you be willing to split the room because he's really got nowhere to stay? And I went, you know, yeah, why not? Absolutely. But you know, I'd been traveling all day. Victor, and I knew Victor had been traveling all day from Mexico. I knew that, and I thought, well, the good thing is that we're probably going to be so dog-end tired, you know, that we're just going to, you know, there'll be I don't have to talk. That'll be so good. It'll be fantastic.
Okay, so you guys didn't sleep all night. Yeah, you had
like 2 o'clock in the morning, dude.
Oh,
like it was because I mean, Victor is such a fascinating, wonderful, passionate guy about culture, and it came out of his time in China and I've had visited China, but you just didn't visit China, did you, Victor? You went for what, 19 years?
I was there 19 years, and actually I realized about 5 years ago that I've been to all of the 34 provinces, regions, and municipalities. So I'm kind of Chinese now.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so as a Mexican in China, right? I mean, we work a lot with kind of what we would call, North America here. We've got English speaking, native speaking, that kind of thing. And so what did they do to Victor Garza? What did that experience do? It's a big question, I know, and we haven't got all day, but what did that do to Victor as a cultural animal in the world?
Well, I got to tell you something. When I was in Mexico looking for an opportunity to go work abroad, I lived before in Germany, I lived in Canada, I lived in the US, but I didn't work in any country at all. So I applied for South Africa. I really wanted to experience something different. I also wanted to work in Turkey, and China was my last choice, but China was the only one that invited me to go work there. So it was a place that I was not really looking forward to, but it really transformed my way of thinking. It's such a different country. It's like Mexico with a very long history. They got 5,000 years of history. We got 4,000 years of history. They also have a lot of ethnic groups. They have about 56. We got 68. So through doing cross-cultural work, I started to learn more about myself, more about Mexico. So it changed my way of thinking. And one of the things I'm really grateful to China is when I was young, I did some TV work in Mexico. And although our TV series go to Bulgaria, to South America, and so forth, we were not aware of this fact that the Chinese television was aware of. They invited me to launch the China Central Television Spanish channel. So I was part of that channel in 2004 when they launched it. And one of the things they told us is, do you know which is the second largest speaking, the second most spoken language in the world? I said, is it English? They said, no. First is Mandarin, second is Spanish, third is English. So they said, do you know which is the largest Spanish speaking country in the world? I said, I guess Mexico. I said, yes. So your country has a very privileged position to be known around the world. And through your language, we're going to get China known around the world. So that actually created a wake-up call in my mind. And this is one of the things that now, that change of mindset in China, now I'm doing that in Mexico, creating a cultural awareness of who we are in the world.
Now, I've had similar conversations with a fellow Mexican trainer. You might actually know each other, Salvador
Rodriguez
Batista,
yes.
Who's been a dear friend of mine specifically for years, and he tells me a similar story that in Mexico the concept of cultural awareness isn't discussed the same way as it is in the English-speaking world or in large parts of Europe, and that working in this field also means educating Mexicans or awaken Mexicans' interest in their own culture and their roots and the diversity that is Mexican culture. Would you say that's about right?
Of course. And let me actually share with you a map right now. I'm going to go with share screen so that we can see something that is really important. Mexico has a shape of a horn of abundance. We say cuerno de la abundancia. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I thought I put here share screen. Oh, there it is.
Cornucopia of abundance, so to say.
In my screen, it says that that I'm sharing it, but you cannot see it yet.
No, don't know why that is.
Okay. No. What should I do? It
Technology
says
is playing tricks with us.
Yeah.
Okay.
While we try to figure this out, we can still imagine, right? So if you look at the map, or if you visualize the map of Mexico, it looks almost like a funnel, a bent funnel with a lot of landmass in the northern parts, and then as it bends towards Mesoamerica towards its southern neighbors, it curves around the Gulf.
The important thing about this Cuerno de la Abundancia, as we say, is that we have on the west coast the port of Acapulco, and on the east coast the port of Veracruz.
Yes.
So for 300 years, we were kind of like the Panama Canal. Asian goods, thoughts, people, and ideas came through Acapulco. They crossed the country through the cities of Taxco, the cities of Mexico City, the capital, and of course Puebla. And then it connected, or they went out towards Europe and Africa. So you know that many ships from Spain actually came from las Islas Canarias, Canary Islands.
Yes.
So we had this connection between actually four continents: Africa, Europe, the Americas, and of course Asia. So today when you see or hear about Mexican music, food, we are all a blending of that. And this is one of the things that I like about these four concepts about cross-cultural, intercultural, multicultural. We have been for 300 years a melting pot of transculturality, and this is a thing we're not aware of. You know, I did a DNA test on my blood, and it came out to be 3% African from Senegal, 25% indigenous blood from the Americas, and the rest Europe, but not only Spain, places like Bulgaria, Finland, and you know, my surnames don't reflect this. So we have been a transcultural nation for more than 300 years.
And wouldn't it be also safe to say that you've been transcultural before the European invasion?
Of course,
I mean, even before Hernan Cortes and all the others came, there have been multiple cultures in what is now the political structure of Mexico, in the territorial mass. You had Olmecs, you had Aztecs, you had Mayas, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few. That there's been a blend of cultures in Mexico long before the Europeans messed it all up, right?
Well, of course, and you got a great point, and this is something that I'm also trying to, promote more. Many Mexican people, and you probably know that through TV series that we have, and also through looking at the Mexican TV system, white skin tends to be more present on our TV screens, and this is not the most popular color in Mexico. Most of the people will be tan skin, So the indigenous part of us is there, and many of us maybe don't accept it 100%. And I think we should, because we have all these blending between Maya people, as you mentioned, Aztec people, which we would be calling Mexicas, Olmecs, which were the mother culture, Teotihuacan culture, Tula or Otomi in present-day Mexico. So we have all this interaction been going on through many centuries. And I believe that the ancient name was actually called Anahuac, which was the land between waters, because of this shape of Mexico. So we didn't have a nation concept, but we were cultures living in the land between waters. So it was kind of like a multicultural mindset already.
With that being said, and understanding that we know that long history of the culture with this transculturality, then would you say that when you got to China, that you found on what ostensibly maybe you prepared for very, very different type of culture, you found some at the real deepest roots of the culture, some commonality in the experience of how diverse and historical that long history had on today's culture?
Of course, and I think that's one of the things that China shaped me the most. China is very well organized. China has a systematized way of, classifying their ethnic groups, their dialects, their food system, and so forth. So I think Mexico, we need to do that. One of the things that China has is that through one party, the country is ruled by one party. I think you can standardize many things quicker. And Mexico, for 80 years, we were ruled by one party as well. But I feel that we didn't standardize many things. Now we have more than 5 parties ruling the country, and we have a lot of diversity, political diversity. But I think we need to standardize certain topics of our country, especially to be strong in the identity that we really have. Right now, we of course have a Mexican identity, but I don't think it's as solid as it could be or it could get.
I think it's important that it's important for, like, you're doing great work here, right? This is, there is, when I'm working with Mexican people, I love working with people from Mexico, and they've got a lot of questions, very curious, right? They're very curious people. But I think that is the question that comes up. They want to know how they explain their culture to other people, right? Because there's stereotypes. Here in the US, there's a real definite stereotype of what a Mexican person is, but Latin American in general. And a lot of it is their exposure to people from these cultures are usually people that are not, let's call it, the professional class, right? And yet there are some highly accomplished, highly educated professional people in Mexico, but it's the stereotype built around what the messaging is here in this country that defines that. So the way to counter that is to have your own story, is to inform people. But wouldn't that be a challenge if you've got a population that really doesn't ostensibly understand first of all, what culture is, how it affects them, and what that is made up of in Mexico?
Well, that's true. I think generally speaking, Mexican people are very cultural people. We appreciate culture, but sometimes we stay in that tip of the iceberg. When we define culture, we usually like defining it through an iceberg. And, there's the superficial culture and then the deep culture. So I think on the surface, we're good about that. We know about our soccer teams. We know about the gastronomy, the food of certain regions and so forth. But when we start going deeper, I'm not sure if many Mexicans know who Aztec emperors were or how their strategy and ideas shaped present-day Mexico. Something that I discovered recently, which is very interesting. Mexico, we use at the end of the word, we use ito, which means small. We say, for example, Victor, Victorito, or now, ahora, ahorita. Okay? Mm-hmm. That actually, even though we're using the Spanish language, that comes from the original language of Mexico, which is the Nahuatl language. And for them to revere something, like in Japan, you would say Victor San, okay? Mm-hmm. In the Nahuatl language, you would say Victor Sin, Zin, Z-I-N, and this means little Victor, but it was actually a way to revere you. So we're speaking that in our language today, but we don't know the origin of it. I like digging this because I work in the field, intercultural field, but we need to create an awareness for us to appreciate our roots and our origins.
I'm careful how I phrase this, but it's been my observation or my suspicion in recent years that Mexico is like many other countries that emerged from colonization from European powers, is still overcoming a hangover, this post-colonial hangover, right? And they're in these cultures, you often find that the imperialist cultural values are somehow put on a pedestal or revered more than the indigenous or local cultures. So by that, even members of the own culture, in this case Mexico, will poo-poo or look down upon their origins and probably hold in higher esteem cultural features, aspects, virtues that are imported or are not, didn't originate in Mexico. Would that be a fair observation, or am I reading
definitely, too much into definitely. And this kind of topic, of course, you can talk about it with people like me who embrace, diversity, but it is a sensitive topic, and sometimes even my fellow countrymen might not be aware that we do have racism in Mexico. We do have classism in Mexico, depending on your social class. Sometimes we deny that this exists, but I feel that it is part of our country. Sometimes I would compare a little bit the way we are strategized with South Africa, the way South Africa used to be in the past. I think Mexico has a subtle way of these different social layers and also racial layers. Of course, we didn't have something openly called apartheid, but we kind of moved through this kind of a racist classist system. It's slowly disappearing. And this is one of the great things that I found when I came back after 20 years of being in China. Now you see television with native languages being spoken. You see now movies made in Mexico with different languages than Spanish being spoken. And recently, one of the movies that made it across the world, Roma, The main character was actually a lady who was not an actress. She's a native Mexican from Oaxaca. And she became quite popular, and it created an awareness of all these stereotypes that we had of indigenous people, you know. So definitely, you got a great point that we really need to work hard about. And also, this is one of the things that I like about China. China is aware of all these colonial, how to say, these colonial powers trying to conquer several parts of China, especially the ports. In Mexico, of course, our connection with Spain, it's a little bit of a painful one sometimes because of the history. And right now, it's actually very sensitive this year because our current president is or asked Spain to apologize about this encounter of 500 years ago. And this is actually causing a dilemma in our country. Some people are angry that he asked for that. But coming from China, living in China, for Chinese people, apologies are very important. And when a country tried to colonize or hurt China, if they didn't apologize, this will create a difficult situation. So right now, this is interesting. Mexico asked Spain for an apology. I don't know how that is going. And Mexico this year will also offer China an apology, because during our revolution, our civil war in 1910, many Chinese citizens were unfortunately killed, or Mexican Chinese people were killed. So this is interesting because this apology to China will probably be welcomed by China, and hopefully will connect us even more with China. Right now, relations with China have been good.
I have a follow-up question to all this, but I do want to acknowledge our audience. Lorena Romo on YouTube is asking you, Victor, according to your traveling experience, do you consider Mexicans to be in general more individualists or team players? Thank you for that question, Lorena.
Oh, that's a good question. By the way, Lorena is from Monterrey. She's a great teacher at one of the high schools here in Monterrey, and I've worked with her students. Some of her students are only 18 years old, and they have been to 60 countries around the world. Wow. They come from a high economical level. So I think from my experience, we are not as individualist as some other Western countries could be, but we are not as collectivist as Asian countries could be. I think we're in the middle. Here in northern Mexico, or generally speaking in northern Mexico, since we're closer to the US, our minds might be influenced by more Americanized values. The south of Mexico definitely is more collective, and especially indigenous people. The way of thinking of indigenous people is definitely community-oriented.
Good. I like your answer, because that brings me back to the question I had bubbling up in my head when you mentioned the Chinese Mexicans. So educate us. In my limited knowledge, there were a lot of Chinese immigrants that came to the west coast of North America, whether it be Canada, the US, or Mexico, in search for opportunities. And the way I was told, especially up in the northern parts of Mexico, El Norte, you would find a lot of Mexicans working on the railroads and building the railroad system, right? Hence the Asian influences in northern Mexican cuisine. Hence this very unique product that many Americans love on their spicy food called sriracha. Was not invented in Asia. It was invented in North America by a combination of Mexicans and Asians, right? So how important is the Chinese influence in certain parts of Mexico?
Okay, I'm going to answer that question in a minute, but I want to enrich your question because it's a really good one. To Mexico, we have had Koreans arriving in the Yucatan Peninsula. We've had Russians arriving in the Baja Peninsula. We had Germans actually arriving to Chihuahua in the North Mexico and Chiapas in the south. So we've had people from many parts of the world. My boss, by the way, Brett, she's a Mexican of Australian background. Leticia Santos Dressel. The Dressel part was actually from Germany that immigrated to Australia and then to Mexico. You know, not many Australian Mexicans in our country. But coming to your point about China, we had a strong Chinese immigration coming from California. After they worked on the Californian Railroad, they came to the western part of Mexico. So the two bigger states on the Pacific coast would be Sonora, which is the second largest in the country, and Sinaloa is one of the largest ones. So they have a lot of Chinese people, but a key city with Chinese culture, it's actually one on the border. You've heard of Tijuana, right?
Mm-hmm.
Near Tijuana has lovely weather. Mexicali is a very hot city. It's bordering Calexico.
Yes.
So when you go to Mexicali, Mexicali has a lot of descendants of Chinese people, Mexicans that look Chinese, and also actually newcomers from China. You see the best Chinese food in Mexico, it's in Mexicali. So they have been actually very strong in the northwest of Mexico. But for example, our previous, one of the top officials of Mexico in the previous 6 years, we go by 6 years here in Mexico. We cannot repeat a president. We cannot re-elect a president. So the previous one was actually, his surname was Chong. He had Chinese blood. And a lot of people from the movie industry, for example, I don't know if you've heard of Emmanuel Lubezki. He has won several Oscars. Mm-hmm. His ancestors came from China, but a part of China that actually has Russian influence, a city called Harbin. Mm. So many people...
Northeastern China, yes.
Northeast China, exactly. Yeah. Very near Vladivostok, the big city. Yeah. So definitely a lot of Chinese people. The top singer in Mexico of folk music, Ana Gabriel, has Chinese blood also. So many influential Mexicans have Chinese blood.
When you talk about the timing of that, I just want to kind of nail the timing of that Chinese influence. You said that there was that forced upon or made more extenuated by the Chinese Exclusion Act from the US, which happened around the 1880s in response to obviously what the Americans then thought was the horde of Chinese coming in, taking advantage and stealing all the gold, right? Was it just another option that kind of maybe a good, happy result of a very bad policy for Mexico?
Right. I think that actually was a direct response to what was happening in the States. They had to come back here because it was closer than going back to China. Mm. Most of the Chinese immigrants in the Americas come from the south part, a province called Guangdong, where Hong Kong is actually located. Hong Kong is actually not part of Guangdong province, but it's surrounded by Guangdong province. Mm. So many of them came through the northern border. And there is actually a great movie. If you guys like movies, last year Mexico produced a great movie that talked about this discrimination. They openly talked about the discrimination towards Chinese. It's called Sonora. It's the name of the state where the movie takes place. And it reflects the path of Chinese people crossing the state of Sonora to try to get to the Baja California, Lower California, which is still a Mexican state, to be a little bit safer, to avoid all these prejudice that was going on in states like Sonora, Coahuila, and perhaps Sinaloa. Okay, so it is a dark part of our history, and this is the reason our president this year will apologize to China about that.
See, this is the follow-up question that I had on the apology. What would it mean to a lot of people in Mexico if AMLO succeeds in getting this apology from Spain? Would that resonate with a majority of Mexicans, or do Mexicans see this as, well, okay, symbolic, but doesn't touch me personally? What do you think?
That's a great question. You guys live in the United States, both of you, and you know that your country has been polarized because of politics. Mexico right now is exactly the same. We have people that love the president. We have people that don't love our president. I personally would feel happy if that could happen, because it's an acknowledgement, that something different happened. And at the time, maybe it didn't have the negativity effect that now we see, from this perspective of being in this time of history. So I think it would be good for history and for the diplomatic communication between the two countries. But I don't think maybe for many Mexicans, people might be happy for that moment. But as in many other things, a good feeling comes and then the good feeling goes. Mm-hmm. One of the important things that I think will be good for these kind of moments to be really kept inside us is to really acknowledge for ourselves, not only as Spain to for an apology, but Mexico has to reconcile its past. Right now, there are a lot of documentaries that talk about two important historical people. You mentioned one of them, Christian, Hernán Cortés. He's supposed to be the father of the new blending of Mexico, of the mestizos of Mexico, because he was Spanish. His first indigenous wife was from the Nahuatl Enya ethnic group. It was an Aztec woman called Malinche. So in the Spanish language, Malinche, it's a negative word because it talks about someone, a Mexican who loves foreign people or appreciates foreign people more than Mexicans. But right now, maybe 5-6 years ago, the image of Malinche has been introduced in a different way, more of a diplomat who could speak at her language, which was Aztec, who could speak the Maya language. And then through Maya language, she could talk to a Spanish guy who had was shipwrecked in Yucatan, and then he himself would translate to Hernán Cortés. So right now, there are a lot of TV series talking about La Malinche and Hernán Cortés, and I think that slowly, that reconciliation is slowly happening, but it might take time. If that doesn't happen, we don't really have a solid foundation if who we are as a solid, as a modern Mexico state, as a modern concept of Mexico,
And I find that interesting because this is not unique to Mexico. I've seen this in many other societies around the world where there was outside influence. The prevailing powers, the victors, not you, but those who win a conflict, they get to write or define the narrative of history, right? So in that case, the narrative is a very European/Spanish one because Spain occupied what is now Mexico. So this indigenous woman is seen as a social climber because she buddied up to the invader and therefore got a better position for herself. That's a very European way to look at this, right? You could look at it from the other angle and say, well, she facilitated an exchange, right? And we've seen this in North America just as much. We've seen it with the figures of Chief Sequoyah, who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation, who was a facilitator in exchange between the white settlers and the native Cherokees. And there's many other figures, but they've been diminished by the Eurocentric narrative of history, right? So it's fascinating and both frustrating for me. I'm a historian, right? So for me, this is frustrating to see history written only from one angle and missing all the other facets of reality.
Well, you got a great point there, Christian. Last year or 2019, we lost one of the best and greatest anthropologists that Mexico has ever had, Miguel León Portilla. He wrote a book called The Vision of the Ones Who Didn't Win. And that vision is the vision of the native people of Mexico, how they saw this process of colonization and so forth. So people, and he used to speak Nahuatl very well, and that's very important because through the way he perceived we say in Spanish, la cosmovisión indígena, the indigenous cosmovision, he could really perceive it through the Nahuatl language. Okay, through him, actually, I learned a lot of things about the Nahuatl language through the TV shows because I never met him in person. So I think having books that describe the other perspective, it's an important one. Okay. Yeah.
I haven't read this gentleman's books, but my children brought to my awareness a book here published in the US written by a gentleman called Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N, The People's History of the United States. It narrates history through the eyes of the other party of a situation, right? And it sounds like a similar approach. And the first time I became aware of this identity, I wouldn't say crisis, but this yet to be fully defined Mexican identity. I had a glimpse into this when I first visited the peninsula of Yucatan, and I was in the state of Yucatan and Quintana Roo, and I had the opportunity of interacting with the locals out there in remote parts of Yucatan, not in Merida or not in one of the bigger cities, but back in the villages, right in the jungle. and everybody was communicating in Mayan with
Right,
each other.
exactly.
And I, with my little Spanish that I speak, I try to make meaning or communicate. And sure, they did speak Spanish with me, but then when they spoke with each other, they defaulted back to Mayan. And up until then, I was not aware of it, that in this part of Mexico, Mayan is an officially recognized language.
Right, exactly.
I didn't know.
And you know, something that I appreciate from both of you is the interest in Mexico, because, you know, I work mostly as a cross-cultural trainer with Mexicans now with foreigners moving into Mexico and Mexicans moving abroad. Before I did that in China, you know, for almost 20 years. But one of the things I found fascinating is that sometimes foreigners appreciate more these kind of cultural differences of Mexico, the cultural historical moments of Mexico than ourselves. You know, sometimes we take it for granted. So this is one of the reasons I want to create this cultural awareness with younger Mexican people and with expats from Mexico, because we need to really connect with this past and love and appreciate this past. You know, foreigners, you know, you guys work also as intercultural coaches and trainers. It's easy to trap them, to make them fall in love with the country by introducing things that you know that they appreciate. That peninsula that you've been to, I took notes here. It's very interesting because usually American people go to Cancun and, you know, the beach areas. Europeans usually go to the Maya sites, not only Chichen Itza and the famous one, but to deeper ones. There's a state right now we call Campeche. They are on green. Only 2 states in Mexico are healthy right now: Campeche and Chiapas in the south. They are green on the COVID light system. We have red light, yellow light, and green light. So Campeche has a lot of archaeological sites that are not very well known to American people, but you see there French tourists, German tourists, Finland's tourists. So you can see this appreciation from European nations about the Maya culture. Right now, there's actually a very controversial project going on. Our president decided to do a train route that goes around the peninsula so that people could get on Cancun, travel to Tulum in the middle, go to Chetumal in the south, and then go around the peninsula so they can see all of these sites. You know, this has created a lot of controversy in our country, but coming from China, where I saw the effect of the trains, you know, they used to have old-fashioned trains when I arrived. Now it's all bullet trains. I can see that if this is managed well, it will bring the development that the president is looking forward to. You know, there's also a train being constructed between Oaxaca and Coatzacoalcos, Salina Cruz in the state of Oaxaca and Coatzacoalcos in the state of Veracruz, which will be like a Panama Canal, but through a train. So hopefully this will be like that connection we had in the colonial days, where Asian products and people would come through the Pacific and then go across and then go to Europe. So these 2 train projects, for me, they are interesting, hoping that, you know, it doesn't create disharmony in people or in the environment, you know, the atmosphere.
As long as, and this is always my top concern, is when I go to a place where originality has been preserved to a certain degree, that when we enter with our modern infrastructure, that a lot of the originality gets lost because of the invasion of money and tourism, and of course it also brings more prosperity. I'm not going to negate that either. It's a really tough balance to find.
But that's the point where I told you, we are like trees. Humans are like trees. If we have good roots, the tree cannot fall. So that's why it's very important to know our value system, to know our history, and to be proud of all these richness that we've had through interculturality. I don't know if you've heard the song La Bamba. Have you guys heard that song?
Yeah.
La Bamba has African influence. So this is the 3rd root that it's now being discovered in Mexico and acknowledged, the African root. And we still have some people with very strong African features in southern Mexico, but the culture itself has permeated in our food, and especially through our music. There is an instrument in the state of Chiapas called marimba, and that has its origin in African nations as well.
Nice. I love that metaphor of the tree. There's an exercise I do, you know, when we're in person. It's a lot easier to do, but with groups, where I open up a session with and just ask people to draw a simple tree. because everybody can draw a tree. You know, pull a piece of paper out and a pencil, just draw me a tree. And pretty much invariably, everyone draws the top. Everyone draws they start at the branch, they start at the trunk, and it's great. And it is always telling, there's usually one or two people that will draw, when I point out, I said, notice you didn't draw the roots. You're not recognizing what the actual strongest part of the tree is.
Exactly.
And this is what we're here to talk about. And there'll be somebody who's proudly gone, I drew the roots, right? and they're usually from a culture that is kind of has more of a contextual view of the world, right? A deeper view of the world. And so that was an exercise that I learned from 𝙒𝙬𝙤, the wonderful designer of many, you know, and it's a simple one, right? Many of his most successful exercises are quite simple in just the awareness of pinging that, oh, right, that's a great point. Why do we not draw the roots? Because we're so fascinated, and I guess in a busy world we're captured by what's on the surface. Yeah.
And that's, you know, that tree analogy, one of the things I also like, you know, the roots are the strong part, but also when it's fall time, the leaves start to fly. And this is one of the things that is really important. I don't know if you've heard of the Globalization of World Cities Research Network. Have you heard about that?
No, not aware of it.
They talk about cities being classified as alpha, beta, and gamma cities. And alpha itself has like 2+, 1+, neutral, and 1-. So an alpha, double alpha city would be London and New York City. Those are the top, you know, globalized cities. This is in regards of globalization and economical integration. So in Mexico, we only have one alpha city, which is Mexico City. Then comes beta cities, and that's where my city comes in, Monterrey, and then gamma cities, where Guadalajara comes in. So sometimes here in Monterrey, you know, we are the NAFTA, the free trade agreement city, you know, close to the US. And I think sometimes we overestimate that we feel too global, but globality goes beyond Texas or New York City. You know, there's also Tonga out there, or, you know, Switzerland or Tanzania, other places, you know. So
or China as a major trading partner for Mexico, right?
Right, exactly. So this is something important to create this awareness that sometimes we think we are global, but when we start realizing what globality is about, I think we have to be humble and accept we need to grow more and learn more about this, you know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna take this lightly with a tongue in cheek, but maybe it's because Monterrey people know that they play the best soccer in the country.
You know Monterrey well. This is also, as I told you, our president. People are divided with the president. Here in Monterrey, families are divided. One side might go for the Tigers of the State University, and the other ones for the striped Rayados that used to play in the private university. We got a great stadium, by the way, 2 very nice stadiums in the city, but one of them looks like the one in Beijing. And definitely in one family, one side goes one way, the other to the other side.
So Tigres, and what's the other one?
Rayados.
Rayados.
Rayados. And this is something interesting. Rayados are actually named after the indigenous people of the state of Nuevo León. They used to be native, nomads who would worship our Cerro de la Silla, our state emblem. The state emblem of Nuevo León has these archers throwing arrows towards the Cerro de la Silla. This year, by the way, we went there, a couple of friends of mine and I, we went there to receive the first sun rays from Cerro de la Silla.
All right.
Beautiful mountain.
Soccer. I could talk about this all day.
I know.
So 19 years in China, Victor. Coming back from that, coming back to Mexico, not only did your perception of your country change, but arguably your country changed as well during the time you were gone.
A lot.
What would you say were the biggest, the most blatant changes that people could have noticed in that time span?
I think appreciation of diversity, because like I mentioned, you see a lot of TV shows with native looking people, with native topics, okay? So the indigenous languages of Mexico are being appreciated and spread out through the media, radio, TV. Also the African root. another one, which is a sensitive topic also in our country, but it's the LGBT. Here in Mexico, it's not only LGBT, it's like 6 more letters, TQTQI. Okay, so this is also quite diverse. And one of the things I love about Mexican people today is that the younger people are quite open-minded. So I like this open-mindedness, okay, about talking about all these, even religious diversity. You can see Muslim mosques in southern Mexico. You can see people practicing Buddhism in northern Mexico. Not as much, of course, as in the US or in Canada. These are more truly multicultural societies. But we're starting to have this acceptance, okay? The only issue I see is that even though there is this openness, the roots might not be there, okay? So we need to work on that tree, you know, so that the young people can have strong roots of who they really are.
I guess we're all arborists. We're not interculturalists. We're arborists. We got to nurture the trees. I love it.
And one important thing also, Christian.
Yeah, Graciela Gonzalez is giving us applause. So muchas gracias, Graciela.
One of the things about coming back, being in China, I was able to visit the 5, well, on a Mexican mindset, we have 5 continents because we don't divide North and South America as 2 different countries. We just call the whole thing the Americas. So from the 5 continents perspective, populated continents, I've been to all of them, about maybe 58 countries. So we have a saying in Mexico, como México no hay dos. That means there's no 2 countries like Mexico. And being away, it really made me appreciate the great country that I come from. You know, I love this country. I love being Mexican. We have, of course, challenges, but we truly have many weather systems. We have this cultural diversity. The culture itself is very rich. We have, I think in the Americas, we're number 1 with most UNESCO sites in the Americas and number 5 in the world. Oh, wow. So it made me appreciate my country. I wasn't planning to come back to Mexico, actually. Now that I've been back, I had to come because of a family emergency. But now that I've been back, I like being back. Some of my friends said, come back to China. We'll help you develop your business again and so forth. And I said, well, I love China, but I'm enjoying Mexico very much. And we do have challenges, of course. But I love this country. I love its culture. And the people are amazing.
Wow. There's another Spanish proverb I learned the other day, or last year, that is, when I discovered a product of Mexico that was foreign to me before. Para todo mal, mezcal, y para todo bien, también. So,
well, you have to taste Bacanora from Sonora. One of my friends, Uriel, he gave me this Bacanora from Sonora, which is kind of like mezcal, but stronger.
Oh, okay. So there's my mind's still blown from the mezcal. So you're introducing me to something that, oh gosh, all right. We'll have to talk, Victor.
Well, there's no doubt that you know, and this is just the same conversation that I related to when we first met. You know, I was in awe of the depth that you've actually really dived into, the effect that's had this work has had on you, right, and your experiences has had on you. And we can only wish this for everybody, and we can only wish that anybody can be exposed to the passion and the brain power that you bring to this work, Victor. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's great.
Well, and it looks like we may have lost him. At least his video feed froze up. So maybe that's a sign for us that this episode needs to come to a close. Victor, if you can still hear us, I guess no, he's been dropped off. So hey, it is all good. We've done our thing. It's complete. Thank you, Victor, for taking time, and he'll see the recording that we cleaned up well after him. Brett, thank you for bringing him on. That was a lovely conversation. I love that.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and I encourage anybody who wants an understanding of Mexico. If you're you know, if you're moving there, or you need some knowledge about doing business in Mexico, or just in Mexico in general, he's just a fascinating guy, and that's and you can see that. And really, 45 minutes is too short to talk about to somebody like that. But that's great. Thank you again, sir. That was episode 132, Two Chaps Many Cultures. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button, share it around, tell your friends. And you've probably got many of them. You don't even know that they need to hear this kind of content. Yes. This is fun. So So we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for the questions and the people that joined us today. And we will be back tomorrow.
We'll be back tomorrow, and we will take you from North America, Central America to Northern Europe.
Yeah.
Ooh, Scandinavia tomorrow. Be there.
Bye.
Ciao.